Hi, everybody. David Donaldson here with my esteemed associate Joseph Martin and our guest Brad Clayton. And we're going to talk about today the value of an agent's business. I think it's something that's often overlooked, and they think about I'm transactional based and I'm a real estate agent, and they don't think deeply enough that they are actual business owners. We understand brokers, there are brokerage owners, there are multi-market center brokerage owners, right? Franchisors. But the agents themselves are the heartbeat of what's happening out there, and they truly need to understand how much of a business owner they are. And I think ultimately take that maybe a little bit more seriously. And Brad, I just wanted to have a conversation with you about what that looks like from what you do in your world, right? And before we jump into what value you're going to bring us, let's just kind of give everybody a little backstory on you. Right? What was the entrepreneurial drive that led you to start Clayton Wolf and specialize in real estate companies, mergers, acquisitions, and ultimately understanding value?
Yeah, David, Joe, thanks for having me on the show today. It's a pleasure. I can definitely relate. As I said in the pre-show, I actually attempted to do a podcast back in the day, so I know how much work goes into the production. So a little bit about me. I like to always start off and say I'm from Delaware. I live in Arizona at the moment, but there's not very many people representing Delaware, so it needs to be represented. That's where I'm from.
Go Blue Hens.
Go. That's awesome.
Yeah. So
You guys got great beaches. I'll give you that. You got great beaches. Wonderful beaches.
don't knock it. Like
I'm
unless
not.
you've been, you
I
don't
love,
get it.
I love
Yeah.
Rehoboth, and I love Dewey. They're great beaches.
Yeah.
It might be a little bit. Never mind. I'm going to stop there before I get
No,
myself
it's all
in trouble.
good. I think the highest point of elevation is about 80 feet. We need oxygen bottles when we go up there. But anyway,
If you haven't been to the Stone Balloon, you haven't lived.
yep. So it's interesting when people ask about my background. I never really know where to begin because it's not a straight path. I have always had an entrepreneurial spirit in me, just as part of it. It's just part of my DNA. I remember at 12, I went out and I got a job, and I've been working ever since. And whether it's been for somebody else or especially for myself, I have that drive. I love creating. And when was it? Where I really got started in the real estate industry. So I had, let me back up. Prior to 2007, I started it was a wireless franchise. You remember back in the day, they still might exist, but they had stores where you'd go in and you could buy T-Mobile, Sprint, Verizon, right? You can buy all your accessories. And I think now you just go directly to the stores or just order it online. But back then, we created a franchise and we grew into 10 states. We had 33 franchisees, and I learned the hard way that it is very important to choose your business partners wisely. I'll leave it at that. So 2007,
You learned a few things.
Let me write that one down.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming you learned a lot about operating agreements. Got it. All right. We'll keep.
It's so funny. You really don't learn as much about yourself unless something completely and totally fails, or you're in constant struggle every day and you're trying to figure out what is going on here. Those I always tend to learn the most then. But so I was very much in need of a job suddenly, and I found a company called Realogy. Everyone pronounced it Realogy. Then they named themselves Anywhere. You can insert crickets. I don't know. Anyone out there? Love it. Let's work on the name a little bit. But no, they were great to me. And I started when I first started, I had the business experience. I was still very young, but frankly, and a little bit embarrassingly, I didn't even know that there were two sides to a real estate transaction at the time. I didn't own a home, and they had a tremendous training program, and so I started selling Coldwell Banker franchises, and I had the awesome territory. And just wait, it's of Colorado, Wyoming, a little bit of Idaho, and parts of Arizona and El Paso, Texas.
You were
And
set up for success. There was demand out the yin yang on that one.
we
I
are
guarantee you.
talking, yeah, I don't think that you could pick a spot in the United States with more open areas. So that was my territory. And that was September 2007. So the month before, right? Yeah. So everyone is they're making all sorts of money. So I started when all that stopped. And there was, as you might imagine, a lot of attrition. Selling franchises at the time was not really popular because everyone's trying to, after 2007 and everything that happened with with the mortgages, they're just trying to recover. But I really relied on my business acumen and actually did very, very well. And so I think my first 4 years, sold 19 franchises.
Wow.
And it wasn't speaking about the merits of the brand. It was really speaking with the people and finding out what they wanted. And that's always been my style. So fast forward, I'm so grateful for the opportunity that I had there because it really launched my career. So even though that I was doing really well as a sales guy, my real passion is to do something on my own. I struggled sometimes having to, just being told that you have to show up at this particular time and you have to go home at a particular time. And it's really not how I'm built. And also I'm not an office guy. I'm just going to admit it. I'm not. I know we're supposed to probably say the other thing, but I'm not. All right. I like being out and about. And so in 2012, I started out on my own. And I had a couple of very small stints where I worked for some companies in there. I worked up in Canada for a full year, which was fun. Different world, different time. But for the most part, I was hung a shingle out and said, I love valuation and mergers. And that's really, I think, a result from what happened in 2008, 9, 10, and 11, that the only way to really do a deal is just you have to start putting companies together. And I didn't, at the time, I didn't have any experience in mergers and acquisitions, M&A, but you get in there and you learn, and suddenly I've figured out that I'm pretty good at this, and I love it. So, I went back to school to get my MBA in corporate finance, and the rest is honestly just history. It's just been year after year after year, growing the business. And right now we're focused on valuing real estate brokerages, commercial companies, real estate teams. We're getting ready to launch some pretty cool software that takes a lot of the guesswork out of doing valuations, and we're pretty excited about that. And I'm working with top brokerages as well as top agents, top teams, to take their businesses to the next level. Take a look and assess what's going on, and then saying, okay, here's how you get to the next level. So that's it in a somewhat brief nutshell, as briefly as I can do it anyway.
Look, I love that detailed history of setting the table of how you understand and what brought you to where you are today, right? It's funny how people like you and I have recently met, but we've got similar backgrounds, right? Not Delaware, Philly, but close enough, right? And time spent in Arizona, good time spent, right? And also I got my license in 2007, so I understood, because you were at ground zero, as was I, about learning and coming up in a business that was going through radical change and upheaval. And now we look at where we are, which is different as far as why, but similar in that there are structural changes happening and challenges that the brokerage owners, the teams, the business owners are going through, right? That are going to lead us into an area of mergers and acquisitions again, because people are looking to grow and people are looking to get out, because we're not in the good times, right, of lining our pockets. We're in times of change. But change is opportunity, right? Yeah. Hence is why what we're talking about today.
Yeah, exactly right.
And so with that, I think there has to be an understanding. You say you're laying the foundation for some software and understanding, but let's just kind of give a brief definition for people. We're looking at, and people might be saying, hey, I'm a business owner, but I don't look myself and as my business essentially of having value. But I think we have to talk about fair market value. And why is that important to an owner at any level of their business to set the foundation for where do they want to go?
Yeah, it's really interesting because the IRS defines fair market value. Forgive me, this is going to be boring, but here we go. Right?
Well, let's keep it a little bit up, right? We started off with the IRS, so we can only get better from there, right?
I don't know. Go refill your drink. Take a little bio break right now. But it's so the IRS defines it as the price at which the business would change hands between a willing buyer and a willing seller when the former is not under any compulsion to buy and the latter is not under any compulsion to sell, both parties having reasonable knowledge of relevant facts. Blah, 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 blah. Why do I know that? I don't know. I'm a nerd. So
now I know why you and Joe get along.
Yeah. So it's essentially like, okay, value is created. I mean, you can have something that to one person means nothing, and yet you could end up selling that exact same item to another person where it means everything. So the value is actually established between two people of what one is willing to pay for it and what the other is willing to sell it for. And we have quote unquote experts, right? I'd be in that category. But how do I really know how much? I mean, we have all these rules and there's finance rules and we use everything and we say, well, okay, well, based on all this set of rules, this is how much something is worth. That's why we have appraisers. But deep down inside, do we really know? We're using all of the tools that we have to establish what somebody's asset or business is worth on an open market. Where somebody else can come in, pay for it, and then continue running it, and then in the sense of a business.
So what I think is interesting about anybody that's listening right now about like why we're talking about valuations is that most agents, you're operating a cash flow business, and there's usually two types of business. You have one business is cash flow, which you're willing to pay a certain multiple on to buy it, and then there's enterprise value, which usually has to do with like some type of like intellectual property or some type of like patent that you've got on some type of technology. So when you look at businesses, you got to say like cash flow, or is it like this enterprise value of some type of asset that you're selling? And the second part is how you value that, which I think you're about to get in, is like what is the mathematics on that? And different businesses trade at different multiples on how you value that based on whether or not the asset is let's put it, I guess the better way to say this is how deep and how wide is your moat on the business will determine what type of like multiple the thing trades at. Because I think a lot of us in real estate always think, oh, we're going to keep operating. And I think the key part to listen on this valuation is how the things value, and also look at your business and say, if you're getting up every day and never think about selling it, you do a different set of operations. Whereas if you say, hey, Brad, I'm selling this thing in 3 years, you're going to make different decisions and you're going to operate a different way because you know your exit plans in 3 years.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
You touched on two things there as far as profitability and intrinsic value, whether it's enterprise or software. But I think the one thing that when I look at least from a real estate practitioner, business owner type of standpoint, that gets missed on most of them is the largest asset they have is not the number of transactions they've closed. It's the data and how well that is organized and stored and it's accessible around those transactions. Because if I don't document anything, if I don't store all of that data about all the people I worked with, what do I truly have? However, if I haven't done as much business, but I've got an incredible Rolodex of data and relationships about what they're looking to do, I personally see much more value of what that could become.
Yeah, and see, what's interesting, David, what's so interesting, so I've actually not heard that point put the way that you just stated, but
well, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. No, I'm strongly convicted about that.
So clearly, right, that is what is most important to you. And so when you're looking at a business, you might be willing to pay a little bit more for a business that has everything, data at their fingertips, right? You're a numbers guy. I'm a numbers guy. And you ask me a question and I'm right on it, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And look at the data, the data is so valuable, and I can look at all of the different things that I can do with it. Whereas to another person, be like, right? That's not, the most valuable thing to me are number of transactions. Well, I hope you're making money on the number of transactions, right? Another could be, well, it's just the cash flow. Or another person could be, it's the systems. There are some general rules surrounding it, but that's the beauty of it. The value is established by you finding that connection with on the other side of the transaction, the other person, right? And so if I'm a data-driven guy, I need to find the David Donaldsons of the world, right? I'd sell it for more. Joe, no way. Sorry, Joe.
I definitely much more the relationship guy, right? That's fair.
Here's a real example. Right now, different industry, but people can relate. I am working with a loan officer in the mortgage industry somewhere in the United States. And this particular loan officer wishes to retire. And just like a real estate agent, they are 1099. So there's a business that they have a 1099 agreement with, but they have their own profit and loss statement. They pay their own taxes from it. They have their own write-offs. And this individual they want to retire. And so she came to me and said, is there value in my business? I want to sell it to my partners. I've been developing these relationships for 25 years. And there's arguments on both sides, right? On one side, you could say, well, yeah, you have the relationship, but there's absolutely no guarantee that, the relationships that you've built are going to conduct business with you. Again, the same can be stated in real estate. However, there's something that is very different. She has an exclusive relationship with a company that has been feeding business to her for the past 20 years. And that company will not feed business to her partners unless she says so. So, would you be willing to pay for the right to have continued access to that business? The answer is yes, right? And then you've got to figure out how much. But a real estate business it's similar. So I don't want people to draw the wrong conclusions, but when we're taking a look at the value of your business, we're really taking a look at what do you have that somebody else doesn't? And if I were to step into your shoes, how likely am I to earn what you've been earning without you involved? And if the answer is, well, you just, I'll give you access to a database that I have, well, there's not a lot of value in that. But if there's, hey, I represent an exclusive community that I've represented for 20 years, and they are only going to have one person, and then it's providing X amount of dollars per year, yeah, I'd probably have to pay for something for that.
I think that's a really valid point. And I think that's kind of where I was touching on, like it's the database, it's the relationship with the database, it's how you're generating through that database, right? And obviously when you take the primary source out, that makes it a challenge. But at the same time, it's being maintained, and how that transition happens, right? Because it's not usually typically in a real estate transaction, not typically a rip off the Band-Aid and go take my business, but there usually is a transitional. And if you follow Nick Crotter and you think of like the golden handcuff, that's kind of the process, right? If you have an organized transactional crackability, right, and transitional plan, that should theoretically be more value than just that, hey, I've done 100 transactions, there's cash flow in my business, how did I get there?
Right. Yeah, if no one's willing to pay for it, then it's...
Right. So when we look at, and if we understand, okay, if that's at course, we can establish value through that. We talked about '07, we talked about today, and there's obviously fluctuations in markets, right? How much fluctuation affects a business owner, or how much should they worry about fluctuations to the point that it affects or changes how they run their business?
Yeah. Okay. So I'll throw the question back to you before I answer it.
It's my show.
No, it's fun though. It's fun. So, because I get thrown this question all the time, right? Let's say that you have a business and it has been, let's throw out 2021 and let's just use a low number. Let's say that it's been making $100,000 a year, right? Nice round number. And so the way that a lot of conversations start is they said, okay, well, the average multiple on that $100,000 after all is said and done is 3.5, and that's taken over a long period of time. So what that means is that on average, for the past 50 years, you've got, for every $100,000 in cash flow, it sells on average for $350,000, 100 times 3.5.
Okay.
Right. But let's say last year you just did 10,000. So does that, let's apply the logic. Does that mean that business is 35,000? So in 1 year, right, you've got 20 years of history of 100, and then last year you had an anomaly year and now it's 35,000, or double that. Let's say in 2021 you made 500,000. So you're saying that business is worth, what is that, 1.75 million? I think.
Yep.
I'm doing it in my head. The answer is no. So you have to take a look at with everything that has been built, you also, when you take over a business, are going to have up years and you are going to have down years. But based on the systems, the brand, the recognition, the repeatability of what you have put into place, that is going to continue, that it's not based on a dynamic talent. Sometimes we see businesses like that where you have this incredible business leader or leadership, but then somebody else steps in their shoes and they just can't do it, right? You've got people that they can do the jobs of 3 or 4 people. We all know them, right? But then we're like, oh my gosh, I have to hire 3 more people to do your one job. So you have to take a look at how likely am I to have the same results that you did based on what you built, and that's what you established the value from. It is so dangerous to use a multiple. And so the business from it, where it will fluctuate quickly is if there's a drastic change to the actual structure of the business. 50 agents walk out the door. Yeah, you need to get your business revalued. But it shouldn't change that much from year to year.
Excellent. And that's kind of what I wanted to hear, right? Because I think there's the gut check, and I understand anything's only worth, if you find yourself having to sell in a downtime, okay, that's a different conversation.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and not only that, David, but you have people, because there's more risk right now, right? And you did 10,000, you're like, I'm not going to pay you $300,000 for your business. There's that there's that gut check, right? So it's because of people's perceptions and fears and uncertainty of where things are headed that, a buyer's currently right now, they're not paying as much. That's where, you've got to focus on, all right, what is it that you've built?
So, there's also the aspect of not just what have you built, but how do you insulate what you've built, right? So then we talk about opportunities of growth from a foundational business to how do you build things around that to increase value, but also lock in value.
Yeah.
So how does an agent plan for that, or broaden their base through relationships or vendor partners or other wealth avenues, right, to strengthen that value?
Yeah, excellent question. So the more barriers to entry that you can create. I mean, let's face it, it does not take a rocket scientist to open up a real estate company. There's no offense being, sent out into the ether towards anyone, but we're not going to school for 8 years, right? We don't we're not all sitting. Yeah, so you understand my point, hopefully. But you have to take a look at and say, okay, how where could a competitor really rip into me? How easy would that be? And if you can start coming up with ideas of, oh my gosh, so I'm really vulnerable in this one area, you've just given yourself an area to start focusing on where you can build those barriers. I know of one real estate company that, believe it or not, it's a smaller city, but they negotiated with the city council that they are the only real estate company that can be in city limits. Doesn't mean, I'm not talking market. Now it's
Yeah.
small, right? That is valuable, very valuable. It's a huge barrier to entry, right? So, the next real estate office has to be about 3.5 miles away. And they can still sell in the area, they just can't have a physical office in the area. So you want to take a look at where are your areas of weakness and vulnerability that somebody could duplicate, or somebody could come in with technology and do it less, more inexpensively than you are. So it's just this constant exercise of taking a look at your business and saying, what are those things that I've put into place that help to sustain the income that I am, at least at a relative level, right? And the degree at which you do that is the degree of where you either increase or decrease in value.
Let's go through valuation 101. So, Brad, how do you typically value a company? Then pick one that's got, I don't know, like let's do an agent business. How would you value an agent business, like for giving it a sale number if I want to acquire it?
For those watching the video, Joe, I don't know what the issue is. I just take a look at their net income for 12 months and multiply it by 3.5. That's how I do it. I'm totally joking.
That's why I'm throwing it out there. It's not that easy.
Nervous moment. No. So,
Everybody just ripped up their P&L statements and threw it out the window.
It's good.
If they have P&L statements.
Okay, so blanket statement. When I take a look at the value of a business, the popular way to do it, what you're referring to, and what I was, tongue in cheek a little bit, is applying a multiple to it. And that is not what I would do with an individual agent. So when you're talking about an agent's business, first and foremost, number one, think of yourself as an entrepreneur. Number two, if you're just a standalone agent, I'm unaware of people paying you for your relationships or book of business unless you have something unique. It happens, but it's the exception, not the rule. What we're seeing more so are teams. And there is value to teams. And especially, and I don't like the name, but unfortunately it's one of those things that's stuck. It's teamridge, right? Where you have a team, they function as a brokerage. They're usually housed within a brokerage, but by all accounts, they run everything. And so when we're taking a look at if you're a team, where it actually has two values. The first value is how locked down you have everything. So for an example, if you have agents on your team that they are on lower splits and they have actual long-term agreements with you, long-term being anything over 1 year, to be on your team, that you have marketing and systems in place, that you have transaction coordinators in place, that you have people setting the appointments, and where you are generating leads for your team and they're out closing and your team is just pumping out transactions. That team is very valuable. More valuable than a real estate company doing the exact same level of production, because what the team is doing something that the real estate company is not, and that is they've got their agents under actual agreements where they can't go and leave. So somebody else can step into those shoes and they can as long as they do the lead gen and they've got the social media and it's not just based on one personality, but it is like a machine, very, very valuable, versus the team that you have a super talented team leader, but they do all the work and they're out there and you see their name everywhere, and so much so that it's they're on the trucks, like the big U-Haul trucks, and it's just their name. But you don't really have a lot of systems in place, and if I can go in and duplicate the same thing, obviously I'm not your name, but my name, that's not as valuable, and you may not be able to sell that, right? It may not have value to another person because they can't duplicate what you're doing. Therein lies the difference.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. I get that question a lot, especially from new agents or agents or teams that are growing and they're branded to the individual. And I always caution them a lot of times, like, you have to be very careful when you're thinking long term. If you're transitioning from an asset that is your business and the brand is you personally, would you have potential challenges stepping out of that business and maintaining the uniqueness of that organization when you're no longer affiliated and the affiliation is your name as the brand?
Yeah. Just as you don't want to be the Brad Clayton team, I don't want to be the David Donaldson team, right? It just,
Nobody does.
yeah. You see, it's right. But if you're set up that it is just a machine, oh my gosh, yeah, there's a lot of value to that.
Well, I appreciate that breaking it down that way, because I think that team leads example, right? We see brokerages looking at that. We see larger teams scaling and looking to that, and then adding those relationships of value, right? And building, adding into that base, as I was alluding to earlier, of additional revenue streams through partnerships.
Yeah.
When we look at new business owners, right? Let's forget that you and I have been in the business house going back to the '07 times. Joe just got his license, so this is all relatively new to him. Okay, so we're seasoned professionals here. But if you were talking,
the deadpan and sarcasm throughout this episode is freaking awesome, and I love every part of it.
So if you were talking to Joe who just got his license,
don't do it, Joe. Don't do it.
And he says, Brad, listen, I'm a seasoned business, right? I've got experience in business, but now I'm transitioning to real estate. I'm going to be a real estate practitioner. I'm going to be with a real estate team. How do I scale this thing, and how do I do it well enough with the end in mind? Where do I start?
Oh my gosh, that is such a good question. So, well, let's back up. Just real quick. I'll answer your question, but let's back up. There is example after example after example where you have people with advanced degrees and they look at real estate and they think, this is really simple. How hard can it be to show a home? Right? And then they get into the industry, they take the test, and they're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to slay this. And then nothing. Right? Because the real estate industry, you have to be in it to understand that it just doesn't make a lot of sense. Right? And so if you are a business person, really what it comes down to are two things. Number one, how quickly can you help a person to feel comfortable with you, where they can see that you're credible, you're competent, they recognize that you can help them, that you have the skill set to do so. That's number one. You have to be able to form those relationships quickly. If you have the personality of a cardboard box and you're just a numbers guy, but you have no personality to relate, or you can only relate to certain types of personalities, you're going to struggle. Right? So if you have a person who's really blunt, you have to be blunt. If you have a person who likes long stories, you have to change to do that. The degree at which you can, I'll say, mimic who you're speaking with goes a very, very long way. That covers up so many other things, because you can get training on what to do. You can understand that all of the rules and the regulations and what you should do, but then there's just that experience of working with the buyer or the seller and connecting with them, right? So that's the first part. The second part is, how organized are you on the back end? Now, not everybody is, and that's okay. For example, I love to procrastinate, In my mind, do I love to be organized? 100%. But my golden moments are right before something's due, right? So, what you have to do then is you have to hire somebody that is good at the organizing. Because if you build it where it's just 100% you and it's your talent, no, it's not a good business model. You're going to burn out, right? So recognize what you're good at, be personable. But if you're sitting and you're listening to this and you're thinking of getting into real estate and you don't relate to people, find someone who does and be their back end, right? Not a good idea.
Wow, it is really interesting because we had a previous conversation where somebody kind of alluded to the same thing, that basically saying if you're not a people person, this isn't for you per se on the front end.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, really, I'm an introvert at heart. Maybe I shouldn't admit that out loud.
Well, you did say you're a numbers guy. It's kind of one and the same. I'm just saying.
But it's almost like I have this extrovert button that it's like a suit that I wear. I can push it. I'm like, all right, I'm going to be an extrovert. But my comfort level is I just go and be by myself and not talk to anybody. But obviously you can't run a business that way. And so it's recognizing what you're good at, recognizing your limitations, and then more importantly, and we learned this during COVID, guys, we got to connect with people. Right? If you can connect with somebody and you're credible, you know what you're talking about, you've put in the work, nothing comes for free, right? You're doing a good job, you're looking out for their interests, you're going to go far.
All right, so let me take it a step further as we kind of get into this. If that's starting from ground zero, and we recognize that, hey, maybe your business acumen is through the roof. Maybe you've got some reserves or some capital to apply to this, but you haven't built a team or a business in the real estate industry yet. Understanding the economies of scale and where we are in a marketplace right now, and we could look at this from an associate or a team building type of conversation, or brokerages themselves.
Yeah.
Are you buying for growth right now in this market?
Buying other companies?
If I'm a team, I'm acquiring teams for rapid growth, or if I'm a brokerage, I'm looking to acquire other brokerages.
If it's smart growth, 100%. And what I mean by that, just to qualify, is it is a skill set. If you've only ever operated out of one office and you're buying a company and they have, say, 2 offices, doesn't matter how many agents you have, that is a separate skill set. If you're driving more than 10 minutes to go back and forth between the offices, that is a separate skill set. So I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs, business owners, they'll get out and they're like, man, I got this. I'm going to grow. I'm going to buy this company. But they've never had the experience of managing a multi-office brokerage, right? So my advice is either hire somebody who does, or ease into it. Look for a smaller win. Like, okay, I got this. I have a team. I have another office. And then as you gain experience, you go. If you try to grow too quickly, growth for growth's sake, that's where people will get into trouble. And they often regret it too.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things I took away from, like, thank you for the time, Brad. Like, I think there's a couple things that I took away here for inorganic growth, right? There's organic growth if I just manufacture it, and then there's like inorganic is how do I get into a situation where there's a buyer and seller need, and that there's actually value in both parties coming together. And I think for everybody listening, it's like there is a mathematical equation to evaluation that has some nuance to it. That's why you need professionals like evaluator or a consultant like Clayton Wolf to get in and be able to give that like third party assessment without any emotions on it. And the second part is to understand what you just brought up was like strategic opportunities, meaning like, is there a strategic moat? Is there territory? Is it intellectual property rights? Is it a technology that nobody else has? But also, is there inherent skill sets that you might have through experience? Like what you just brought up for multi-location is a leverage experience. Like, do you have the ability to attract talent that can anchor multiple locations because it's not just your personality? The other one that you're talking about is the ability to have the experience around value add, that you could see a depleted business that's operating at 20% of what it could just because of that how it's being operated, and you could go in, pay a fair market value for it, and because of your experience, your skill sets, your capital, and other items that current seller doesn't have, you could inject immediately and have value out the get-go, which I think is what you're talking about, is that like
It is,
if you
yeah.
right, and that's how you have
Yeah.
to think about smart growth, is what I'm hearing you talk about.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
So
Well, listen, Brad, listen, I think this has been incredibly valuable. I really value your insight and your time and joining with us, and the agents that are with us. And I value having you in my world now as a knowledge base to lean on. So thank you for joining us on Entrepreneurial Impact.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. And just as kind of a parting, and I'm very sincere when I say this, the conference that you put on with four was one of the best conferences I've ever been to. The knowledge that I walked out, right? And Joe and David, you guys have, just for everybody's understanding, they didn't tell me to plug or anything like that, but the intellectual capital that was sitting in that room, the types of discussions that we had, the relevance to today, top notch. So I just have major respect. You guys are on the right track, and anything that I can do to help, I'm in. I love you guys. So, thank you as well for what you are building. It is incredibly valuable.
and likewise, I think the other plug here is I really enjoy. I got to go out to Brad's location out for Clayton Wolf out in Arizona, and the piece that I would share with everybody on here is that if you're looking for insights on valuations, whether it's like what you could sell the thing for, or even better yet, what are the levers that I'm not maximizing in my current business within real estate, that Brad is an amazing resource within Clayton Wolf to give you a third party, no emotions tied to, like real insights into what you're maximizing, what you could be maximizing, and what you could actually get it for. So I think it's just a huge resource within our network of connections of how people and relationships can benefit all parties. So likewise, back to you, Brad, I think it's an amazing partnership, and I appreciate everything you did for coming out to that event out in Nashville for Future of Real Estate Conference.
Yeah, my pleasure, Joe, and thank you both.